Hello, guys. This is Sean from Hutchman Coaching, and we're going to start off by talking about bad therapy. Ooh, controversy. So, I was listening to an interview last night with Abigail Shrier, a journalist, and Mark Manson, the famous or infamous YouTuber and self help book writer. And she was promoting her new book, Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And I know it's getting exciting. So basically, her thesis is that a whole generation of youth in America are being weakened and rendered less resilient because of the prevalence of bad therapy. And I'm not here actually to say that therapy is bad, on the contrary. However, I think she has some really interesting ideas about how it's not so much therapy per se, but the sort of psychologizing tendency nowadays. Everything has a psychological angle. We're all armchair psychologists. A lot of jargon has entered the vernacular, so we talk about things like boundaries and trauma and resilience. And I find this kind of tedious, and I'm a coach. So what about the rest of you? So this idea of how the best of intentions can lead to bad places planted this seed. No, just park that for a moment, okay? I'm not against therapy, and I also think we've got to be really careful about how these concepts sort of pervade our thinking about the world. And she has this kind of contrarian perspective that, for example, parents should not always be second guessing themselves and trying to be armchair psychologists. I think it's an interesting perspective. So now, the other day I was at this talk about DGIs, all these damn acronyms, IDGs, Inner Development Goals. And this emerged out of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the idea was that if we want a more sustainable world, then this needs to be reflected in our own personal development. And the keynote speaker put up a slide of different change makers, people who'd had an impact on the world, people like Malala, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King. And she asked us what we thought, which quality all of these people shared. And people volunteered different responses like compassionate, kind, nice, nothing too interesting. And then someone else raised her hand. Someone by the name of Sarah Jane Setherton, who I met at the event for the first time. She's a power practitioner and she works with women in leadership. Fantastic energy. And she said, well, it's obvious these people all spoke their minds. They spoke up for what they believed in, regardless of the opposition they would face, that they did face. And I thought, yeah, that's you hit it on the head. That's it. And this sort of symbolized to me this idea, like in the room, a lot of people seem to be saying, yeah, these people were nice, they were good, they were almost saintly. And I thought, that's just not true. Most great people cast long shadows. And today I want to talk about the shadow. This book is called Meeting the Shadow, The Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature. And specifically, there's a very short essay in here, which is a little gem. It's called Acknowledging Our Inner Split by Andrew Bard Schmookler. And he talks about Gandhi. And so I'm just going to read you a little excerpt and then finish with a reflection about why I think this is important for coaching. This idea that if we're going to reflect on personal development for social impact, why the idea of saintliness is not helpful and why it's more pervasive, kind of like bad therapy, than we think. So, Schmookler writes, but there is a problematic side to Gandhi, one that Erickson addresses in an open letter to the Mahatma. This dark dimension stems from Gandhi's overzealous striving for moral perfection. Erickson sees in Gandhi's relationship with himself a kind of violence. Also, from the dynamic of that effort to triumph over himself in the mode of war, there grew tyrannical and explosive relations between Gandhi and the people who were closest and most vulnerable to him. In Gandhi's very striving for sainthood, Erickson discerns the toils that bind us to the cycle of violence. Figuring prominently in Erikson's argument here is Gandhi's war with his own sexuality, a war in which projection played a role and in which, partly in consequence, other people were injured. One is reminded here of George Orwell's reservations about the example of Gandhi. No doubt alcohol, tobacco, and so forth are things that a saint must avoid. But sainthood is also a thing that human beings must avoid. Sainthood involves that over-identification with the good part as irreconcilably opposed to the bad part. It connects with the warring mode. Much of that excess of violence which distinguishes man from animals, Erikson goes on to say of Gandhi, is created in him by those child training methods which set one part of him against another. And then he continues, perhaps there is another mode. Goodness can be conceived as health. The linguistic root of health connects with whole. Evil is then sickness to be cured, made whole rather than destroyed in the way of the war maker. Through making ourselves whole, we find the way toward the goodness of peace, the fitting together of shalom. And at the core of that is coming to peace with our being the imperfect, sinful creatures that we are. Erich Neumann speaks of the moral courage not to want to be either worse or better than one actually is. I'm going to repeat that. The moral courage not to want to be either worse or better than one actually is. Now, I want to conclude on the question of, well, what is coaching for me? Because very relevant topic for me right now these days, defining that, giving a good, satisfying answer, both for you and for me. And I think it came down to this. It's this radical simplicity, because though coaches may not admit it, of course, there's a lot of anxiety when you know there are lots of brilliant, learned psychologists, psychoanalysts, people who have got years of study under their belts, and we also have our own methods. We study, we have our certifications, and we try to cloak ourselves in this same language of competence. And competence is, there are definite skills a good, effective coach needs. And I think there's almost, above all that, a wariness of this seductive complexity of it all. And I was going back and thinking of Sarah Jane Setherton's concise answer to the question, what did all these impactful people have in common? They knew what they stood for, and they spoke up. I was thinking, that's the core of coaching. Helping people find clarity about what their values are, and helping them develop the courage to act on those values. That's it.